The Empress of Varan was known throughout the galaxy as one of the most powerful rulers in existence. Her beauty and wisdom were unrivaled, and her strength was a symbol of her empire. The halls of her palace were always filled with suitors, each hoping to win her favor. But none of them ever succeeded. For years, the Empress had rejected every offer of marriage, no matter how great or noble the suitor was. It was said that the entire galaxy had bowed before her, offering riches and titles, but she remained unmoved. It was as if her heart was made of stone, and no one could break through. One day, the Empress held a grand ball. It was to be a grand celebration, with the finest food, music, and dance. But for the Empress, it was just another event. She sat on her throne, her eyes scanning the crowd. 100 suitors stood before her, each trying to impress her with their fine clothes and extravagant gifts. The first suitor stepped forward, his hands trembling as he presented a jewel-encrusted necklace, a gift worthy of royalty. "Empress," he said, bowing low, "I offer you this necklace as a token of my love and devotion. Will you marry me and join our two great families?" The Empress looked at the necklace, her expression unchanged. She glanced at the suitor with a cold, distant gaze. "You may leave," she said quietly. The suitor stood frozen, his heart breaking as he stepped back. Knowing the Empress had already rejected him, one by one, each suitor came forward, offering gifts, promises, and vows of eternal loyalty. Some brought entire fleets of ships, others offered planets and vast riches. But no matter how grand their gestures, the Empress remained unmoved. The crowd grew tense, spread like wildfire through the room. "It's said that no one can win her heart," someone whispered. "She's untouchable. She's the most beautiful woman in the galaxy, but her heart belongs to no one," another voice muttered. Among the suitors, one man stood apart from the others. Kyle was a human, and not a noble or royal in the slightest. He wasn't interested in wealth, power, or status. In fact, he had only been brought to the Empire by accident. A failed trade mission had left him stranded on the planet, and now he found himself at the grand ball, surrounded by a crowd of people he didn't know, all trying to win the attention of the Empress, while everyone else tried to impress her. Kyle stood in the corner of the room, leaning against a pillar. His eyes scanned the crowd with mild curiosity, but his focus was more on finding a way out of the palace. He wasn't here to play games or chase after power. He was just a mechanic from Earth, far from his home. He didn't care about being noticed by the Empress, nor did he care for the endless parade of suitors and their grand displays. The Empress noticed him. She had seen every type of suitor in her life: rich men, powerful men, and men who thought they could win her heart with their influence. But this human was different. He didn't seem interested in her at all. In fact, he looked bored, as if all of this meant nothing to him. His indifference caught her attention. She had seen men try to win her favor before, and she had rejected them all. But this human, this one who didn't even try to flatter her, intrigued her. The more she watched him, the more curious she became. "Who is he?" she asked one of her attendants. The attendant glanced over and hesitated. "That's Kyle, Your Majesty, mechanic from Earth. He wasn't invited, but he's here because of a failed trade mission." The Empress's interest deepened. She had heard stories of the human's strange creatures, capable of extraordinary things, but largely insignificant in the grand scale of the galaxy. Yet, here he was, in her palace, unmoved by the extravagant show of wealth and power. It was unusual, almost impossible. She decided to learn more. As the ball continued, the Empress's eyes kept drifting to Kyle. She watched as he casually observed the crowd, completely unfazed by the wealth and grandeur around him. It was as though he was unaware of the power he was surrounded by. Unlike the other suitors, who fawned over her and tried to catch her attention, Kyle didn't even look in her direction. He seemed content to simply watch the chaos unfold. At one point, their gazes met for a brief moment. The Empress raised an eyebrow, but Kyle didn't flinch. He simply nodded in acknowledgement and returned his attention to the room. To her surprise, she found herself intrigued. Why is he so different? She muttered to herself, her curiosity growing. When the evening's festivities came to an end, and the suitors were dismissed, the Empress made a decision. She would have Kyle brought to her private chambers. She needed to know why he was different from everyone else. As the guards escorted him into the room, Kyle was unfazed. He had been told that the Empress wanted to see him, but he didn't understand why. It wasn't as if he had anything to offer her, no riches, no power, no titles. Just the simple truth that he didn't care about any of that. The Empress regarded him coolly, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. "You seem different," she said. "Why do you not want what all the others do? Why do you not seek my favor?" Kyle shrugged. "I don't need anything from you, Empress. I'm just here because I've got nowhere else to be." The Empress was taken aback. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. She expected him to fawn over her, to beg for her attention.
Ow.
But instead, he was calm, almost indifferent. For the first time in her life, she felt vulnerable. "You're the first man to not care for me," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Why?" Kyle glanced at her. "I'm not interested in your throne or your power. I'm just trying to survive. That's all." The Empress stared at him, her heart racing. She had seen many things in her life, but this human, who didn't care about her, was something she had never encountered before. The attraction she felt was strange, unsettling, and something she didn't know how to deal with. For the first time in years, she felt something stir within her. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity. The Empress sat in her private chambers, her thoughts racing. She had never met someone like Kyle before. While the other suitors had tried to win her favor with their extravagant gifts and flattering words, Kyle had simply shrugged them off, indifferent to her power and status. He hadn't tried to impress her, nor had he tried to please her. He was just himself. As the guards closed the door behind him, Kyle found himself standing in the middle of a vast, elegant room. The walls were adorned with golden tapestries, and the floor was covered in plush carpets that felt like walking on clouds. It was a room that screamed power and wealth, but to Kyle it felt like just another palace. He had seen many like it before on his travels, and none of them impressed him. The Empress leaned back in her throne, her sharp eyes studying him carefully. She didn't speak for a moment, and the silence stretched between them like an unspoken challenge. Finally, she broke the stillness. "You're not like the others," she said, her voice steady, but with a hint of curiosity. "None of the men in that hall were as uninterested in me as you. They all want something, whether it's my throne, my riches, or my power. But you—" She trailed off, her eyes narrowing. "You don't care." Kyle met her gaze without flinching. "I've been in enough palaces and met enough powerful people to know that the things they offer aren't as great as they seem. I'm here because I don't have a choice. The mission I was on went wrong and I ended up stuck here. As simple as that." The Empress' lips curved into a slight smile. "You're too blunt," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. "Most people would try to flatter me, to beg for my favor. But you seem perfectly content to ignore me." "Not ignore you," Kyle said, his tone casual. "Just not impressed." Her smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. She stood up from her throne, her regal presence filling the room. "You are a strange one, Kyle, of Earth, and I find myself intrigued by you." She took a step closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. "You have no interest in my wealth or my title, and yet you still manage to capture my attention. You think that's a mistake?" Kyle raised an eyebrow. "I don't think anything is a mistake. I'm just here trying to survive. What you choose to do with that is up to you." The Empress paused, considering his words. There was something about this human that was different from anyone she had ever known. He didn't want to play the games of courtship that the other men did. He wasn't impressed by her power or her beauty. He wasn't interested in her riches or her throne. He didn't need her approval. And that made him stand out in a way no one else did. For the first time, she felt something stirring inside her, something she had long buried. It was a feeling she couldn't ignore, and it confused her. What was it about Kyle that made her feel this way? After a long moment, she spoke again. "I have a challenge for you," she said, her voice calm and commanding.
A test.
"If you will." Kyle looked at her with mild curiosity. "A test."
What?
What kind of test? The Empress crossed her arms and looked down at him with a determined gaze. I want you to prove your worth to me, Kyle. No more games. No more indifference. I want to see what you're made of. Kyle's brow furrowed. What do you mean by that? Prove my worth? You don't need me for anything? Her lips curved into a small, almost secretive smile. I have a mission. One that requires someone who doesn't play by the rules. Someone who isn't afraid to take risks. It's dangerous, but if you succeed, I'll reward you beyond anything you can imagine. If you fail, she let the threat hang in the air. Kyle was silent for a moment, weighing his options. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, especially not one that might offer him a way out of this strange situation. Despite his lack of interest in her power, he had to admit the Empress had a certain allure that made him want to prove something, if only to himself. What's the mission? He asked. The Empress' smile widened. You'll be traveling to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, where no one has dared venture in centuries. The mission is to retrieve a rare artifact, something of immense power. It's located in a planet. At the edge of known space, a place where only the bravest or the most foolish go. You will face dangers that no one has survived, and yet you must bring back this artifact. Kyle's expression remained neutral. That sounds fun, he said with a hint of sarcasm. And what's the catch? The catch is this, the Empress said, her tone turning serious again. If you succeed, I'll grant you anything you want. Riches, power, influence. But if you fail, she didn't finish the sentence. But the look in her eyes was enough to make Kyle understand. He studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. So you're testing me to see if I'm worthy of your attention? The Empress nodded. Yes, I suppose you could say that. I want to see if you are capable of something greater than what you appear to be. To see if you can impress me, not with your wealth or status, but with your strength and your abilities. Kyle took a deep breath. He had always preferred actions over words. And while the Empress' challenge seemed dangerous, he couldn't deny that it intrigued him. He wasn't here to play the courtship game. Maybe this mission could change things. I accept, he said, his voice steady. I'll bring you your artifact. The Empress studied him closely. Very well, she said. But know this, Kyle of Earth. You may not care for my throne or my title, but by the time you return, you will have earned something more valuable, my respect. Kyle nodded, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead of him. He didn't care about her respect, but he would do whatever it took to complete the mission. If for no other reason than to prove to himself that he could, as the Empress turned and left the room, Kyle felt a strange sense of anticipation. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was about to embark on something far more dangerous. And for the first time since arriving on this alien world, he was actually interested in what would happen next. Kyle stood in the grand chamber of the Empress, his heart beating a little faster than usual. He had accepted her challenge without fully understanding what he was getting himself into. But now, the reality was beginning to sink in. The mission would take him far from the safety of the palace into the wild unknown. A planet at the edge of the galaxy, untouched by any explorers for centuries, filled with dangers he couldn't even imagine. It was a test of everything he had. The Empress, standing by her vast, shimmering windows, turned to face him. She was regal, her every movement carrying the weight of the empire she ruled. But there was something different in her gaze now, something more than just the coldness of royalty. You leave tomorrow, she said. I will provide you with a ship and a guide to help you reach the planet. But after that, you're on your own. I don't expect you to succeed, Kyle. Few have. But if you do, you will return to find the rewards waiting for you. Kyle nodded. He wasn't in it for the rewards. Not really. He was here to survive. That was all that mattered. But a small part of him, one he hadn't expected, was beginning to feel something else, a strange mix of curiosity and challenge. For the first time since arriving on Verone, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. The next morning, a sleek silver ship was waiting for him in the palace's docking bay. It was nothing like the grand ships that most of the wealthy nobles used. It was smaller, more practical, and designed for speed. Kyle appreciated that. No unnecessary grandeur. Just the tools to get the job done. A guide stood beside the Shipa Tall, a dark-haired alien woman with green skin and sharp features. Her uniform marked her as part of the Empress's personal guard. She didn't speak as Kyle approached, but her eyes studied him with quiet intensity. "I'm Celine," she finally said, her voice deep and calm. "I'll be guiding you to the planet, but once we reach the edge of the system, I'm leaving. The rest of the journey is yours." Kyle glanced at her and nodded. He didn't need a guide, but he appreciated her help. He wasn't sure what. He would find out there, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The ship lifted off, soaring into the clear sky above the capital city. Below, the vast empire sprawled out in all its might, shining with the power of its ruler. But Kyle wasn't concerned with that. His eyes were fixed on the stars ahead, on the unknown that waited for him. It was an unsettling feeling, but he'd felt it before many times. It was the feeling of heading into the unknown, of not knowing what lay ahead, but knowing that you had no choice but to keep moving forward. The journey was long. For days, the ship traveled through the vast emptiness of space, far from the comforts of the palace. Kyle and Celine spoke little. She didn't seem interested in conversation, and he was too focused on what lay ahead to waste time talking. At night, he would stare out the window at the stars, wondering what kind of dangers awaited him on that distant planet. What kind of creature or hazard would he have to face? He had been through his fair share of dangerous situations back on Earth, facing wild animals, surviving in harsh conditions, and working in the toughest environments, but this felt different. There was something about the Empress's challenge that felt personal. She had tested so many, rejected so many, and now she was watching him. He couldn't afford to fail. On the fourth day, they arrived at the edge of the system. The stars ahead were distant and cold, and the space around them seemed endless. Celine didn't speak as the ship entered a dark patch of space. The planet they were heading for was hidden here, far from the bustling galaxy, a place where no one had dared venture in centuries. Celine turned to Kyle, her expression unreadable. "This is as far as I go," she said. "The rest of the journey is yours." Kyle looked out the window. The planet was small, its surface covered in clouds and jagged mountains. It was desolate, untouched by any civilization. There was no sign of life. It looked almost abandoned, like something forgotten by time. "You'll have to land yourself," Celine continued. "The artifact you're after is buried deep within the planet's core. Getting to it won't be easy. It's surrounded by dangerous terrain, and the planet's atmosphere isn't kind to outsiders. Be prepared for anything." Kyle nodded, grabbing his gear and heading for the exit. "Thanks for the help," he said, though he knew there was little to say. He was already focused on the task ahead. As the ship slowed and began to descend toward the planet's surface, Kyle felt a sense of calm wash over him. This was what he did. This was where he felt most at home, a mission with everything at stake. The uncertainty of the situation didn't bother him. If anything, it drove him forward. The ship's engines rumbled as it broke through the atmosphere, the turbulence shaking him in his seat. He didn't flinch. This was nothing new. The surface of the planet came into view as they broke through the clouds. Below, the landscape was harsh and rugged. Huge rock formations jutted out from the ground, and the air looked thick with dust. The ship descended further, and Kyle could feel the weight of the planet's harsh environment pressing in on him. There would be no easy path to the artifact. He could already tell that much. The ship landed with a soft thud, the landing gear absorbing the shock. Kyle unstrapped himself and stood, heading for the exit. Celine had already disappeared, leaving him to face the challenge alone. Stepping out onto the planet's surface, Kyle felt the heat of the air hit him immediately. The atmosphere was thick, and the air tasted strange, like something toxic, but not enough to be deadly. It was just uncomfortable. The ground was uneven, with large cracks and jagged rocks. A harsh, dry wind blew across the surface, carrying with it a sense of isolation. Kyle took a deep breath and adjusted his pack. He had no time to waste. The artifact was out there, hidden somewhere within the planet's core. He didn't know what exactly it was, but he knew it was powerful. That was enough of a reason to keep moving forward. His feet crunched against the dry ground. As he began walking toward the mountains in the distance, his mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. What kind of dangers would he face here? Whatever they were, he had to be ready. There was no turning back now. Kyle continued his trek across the barren landscape, each step carrying him further away from the safety of the ship. The harsh wind stung his face, carrying with it a fine dust that made his eyes water. It was the kind of environment that tested a person's resolve, pushing them to their limits. But Kyle had faced worse. On Earth, he had survived in conditions just as unforgiving, if not more. This wasn't so different. The path ahead was unclear. The jagged rocks and mountains seemed to rise out of nowhere, creating a natural maze that he had to navigate. The only sounds were the howling wind and the crunch of his boots against the rocky terrain. The planet was dead quiet, as though it had been abandoned for centuries. And yet Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't truly alone. The Empress's challenge echoed in his mind. He had accepted the mission not for wealth or glory, but because it was what he survived. Survival, he knew, didn't require titles or status. It required grit, resourcefulness, and the ability to stay calm when everything around you seemed designed to kill you. As Kyle made his way through the rough terrain, he thought about the Empress. She had intrigued him from the moment they met. Her cold demeanor, her indifference, it all had made him want to keep his distance. But now, with every step he took, he began to wonder what lay beneath that surface. She was powerful, no doubt. A ruler of an entire empire. But what did that power mean if you were surrounded by people who only sought to please you for personal gain? What did it mean to be alone at the top, where no one could reach you without wanting something in return? Kyle couldn't imagine that kind of life. As much as he had rejected the idea of courtship, there was something in the way she had looked at him that had changed things. She had seen something in him that no one else had. It was the first time anyone had looked at him and not treated him like a means to an end. For the first time, he saw her not as an unreachable ruler, but as a person, someone who might be just as lonely as he was. But that thought was far from his mind as he climbed. Over a particularly steep ridge, the wind howled louder, almost as if urging him to hurry. He couldn't afford to lose focus. The mission was simple enough: return the artifact and return to the Empress. But there was something about the way she had spoken to him, the challenge she had laid before him, that made him feel like this mission was about more than just the artifact. It was about something deeper. Kyle reached the top of the ridge and paused, looking out over the vast expanse of the planet. In the distance, he could see a cluster of ruins, remnants of a long-forgotten civilization. The Empress had said that the artifact was buried deep within the planet's core, but she hadn't explained exactly where. He assumed the ruins might be a clue. Everything about this mission screamed danger, but it also felt like a puzzle, one that he couldn't resist trying to solve. As he descended into the valley below, the ground became softer, almost spongy. It was a sign that he was nearing some kind of underground structure. The air was thicker here, and Kyle's breath came harder as the temperature began to rise. Something was buried here, something ancient and powerful. He pressed on, walking through the ruins with caution. The stones that formed the structure were worn, covered with dust and moss, but there was no mistaking the sense of age that hung. In the air, he couldn't help but wonder how long these structures had stood untouched by anyone. Had they been built by an ancient civilization? Or had they been abandoned for a reason? Kyle pushed those questions aside. Right now, his only focus was finding the artifact and getting back to the ship. He wasn't sure why the Empress had chosen him for this mission, or why she had given him this challenge. But he was determined to succeed, if for no other reason than to prove to himself that he could. Hours passed as Kyle explored the ruins. The further he went, the more he began to feel as though the ruins were alive, silent, but watching, waiting for him to make the next move. Every step he took seemed to echo through the stones, and the sense of isolation grew heavier. But still, he moved forward. It was then that he noticed something. A strange glow, faint but noticeable, coming from a small chamber deep within the ruins. He followed the light, his heart quickening in anticipation. As he stepped inside, he saw Itan, altar, surrounded by glowing runes. Atop the altar lay a stone, shining with an otherworldly energy. The artifact. Kyle's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The artifact the Empress had sent him to retrieve. He stepped forward, drawn to it, the air around it humming with power. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The stone was smooth, but its surface seemed to shift and change, glowing in patterns that Kyle couldn't understand. As his hand reached out to touch it, a voice echoed in his mind. It was soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. "Do not take." Kyle froze, his hand inches from the stone. The voice had been clear, but there was no one around. He looked around the chamber, confused, but there was no sign of anything that could have spoken. He pulled his hand back slowly, his mind racing. Had he imagined it? Or was something else at play here? The voice hadn't sounded like the Empress, but it had felt real. Ignoring the voice wasn't an option. Kyle knew better than to disregard warnings in a place like this. He needed to get the artifact back to the Empress, but was it worth the risk? What if there were more dangers lurking here than he had expected? As he stood there, uncertainty gripped him. The stone before him promised power, but at what cost? Was he about to make a grave mistake? Before he could make a decision, the ground beneath him shook. The walls trembled and dust began to fall from the ceiling. Kyle's heart raced as he realized the danger wasn't over yet. Whatever the artifact was, it had awoken something. The ruins around him seemed to be reacting, as if they were alive. The path forward was no longer clear. Kyle turned to leave, his mind racing with questions. But the chamber's entrance had collapsed, blocking his exit. Kyle knew the true challenge was only just beginning. The artifact had drawn something more than just his attention, something far more dangerous. It was then that Kyle realized the real test wasn't just retrieving the artifact, it was surviving the consequences of taking it. The ground continued to shake beneath Kyle's feet as dust fell from the ancient ceiling above. He quickly turned to the rubble blocking the exit, but there was no way through. The collapse had sealed off the chamber, trapping him inside. For a moment, panic flickered through him, but he quickly forced it down. Panicking wouldn't help. He had to stay calm. His survival instinct kicked in, and he began to assess his situation. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in strange markings and glowing runes. The artifact, the stone he had been sent to retrieve, still lay upon the altar, glowing with the same mysterious energy. But now it seemed more menacing. Kyle had no idea what he had unleashed by touching it. He knew one thing for sure. Whatever was coming next wasn't good. The rumbling continued, and Kyle could feel the air around him thickening. It was as if the ruins themselves were alive, reacting to his presence. He needed to get out. He needed to figure out what was happening and how to stop it. Kyle took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room for anything useful. There had to be something that could help him. He had no choice but to investigate further. He made his way toward the altar, his heart pounding as he got closer. The stone was still glowing, but now the patterns on its surface seemed to shift and change, almost like it was alive. It was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. As he reached the altar, he hesitated. The voice he had heard earlier echoed in his mind once again. "Do not take it." Kyle closed his eyes, trying to shake off the unease creeping up on him. Was it a warning? Or was it just his mind playing tricks on him? He had come this far, and the Empress had trusted him with this mission. He couldn't fail now, not when. He was so close. His hand hovered over the artifact once more, but before he could touch it again, a low growl filled the air. The walls shook more violently now, and Kyle's instinct screamed at him to move. The ground cracked beneath him, and out of the fissures, something began to emerge. It was a creature. Massive, terrifying beast, its body made of jagged stone and molten rock. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and it let out a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ruins. The creature was clearly ancient, something born from the depths of the planet. And it was angry. Kyle stumbled back, his heart racing. This was the danger the Empress had warned him about. The artifact had triggered something far worse than he had imagined. Had no idea what the creature was or how to stop it, but he knew he couldn't fight it head-on. His only chance of survival was to outsmart it, thinking quickly. Kyle darted toward one of the crumbling pillars, taking cover behind. The creature snarled and clawed at the ground, its massive form shifting as it searched for him. Kyle's pulse hammered in his ears as he tried to steady his breath. He needed a plan. And fast. The creature moved closer, its eyes scanning the room, its every movement causing the walls to tremble. Kyle knew that if it found him, it would be the end. But he also knew that he had to face it, couldn't run forever. Looking around, Kyle noticed the ancient symbols on the walls. Some of them were familiar symbols he had seen in books back. On Earth, they were markings of power, ancient runes that had been used by civilizations long gone. If he could decipher them, maybe he could find a way to stop the creature. It was his only hope. He quickly moved toward the wall, his eyes scanning. The runes. The creature growled again, and Kyle knew he didn't have much time. He traced the symbols with his fingers, trying to make sense of them. His mind raced as he remembered something he had read in the ancient texts about this planet. There was a legend about an artifact hidden deep within the planet's core, a stone of great power. But it wasn't just a treasure, it was a key to something much darker, something that could awaken the planet's ancient guardians. The Guardian. This creature was the guardian of the artifact. Now that he had taken it, he had triggered the creature's wrath. But the runes on the wall, if he could activate them, they might help him. Kyle placed his hand on one of the symbols, and a sudden surge of energy shot through him. The runes on the wall began to glow, their light brighter than before, as if they were responding to his touch. The creature stopped in its tracks, its head swiveling toward him, its eyes narrowing. Kyle's heart raced. This was it. He had activated something. But he wasn't sure what. The creature growled again, more urgently now, and began charging at him. Kyle knew he had seconds to act. With his mind racing, Kyle remembered one of the symbols he had studied. In the ruins, it was a protective symbol, one used to bind energy and seal away dangerous forces. He quickly placed his hand on the symbol, and suddenly, the air around him crackled with power. The ground beneath him shifted, and a wave of energy surged through the chamber. The creature screamed as it was struck by the force, its body shaking violently. The energy from the artifact seemed to react to the runes, creating a barrier between Kyle and the Guardian. The creature roared in frustration, but it couldn't break through. Kyle's legs trembled as he realized what he had done. He had managed to create a barrier, but it wasn't permanent. He still needed to get out of the chamber and get the artifact to the Empress. But now, he had a chance. The creature was temporarily distracted by the energy, and Kyle knew this was the moment to act. Without hesitation, Kyle grabbed the artifact from the altar. As soon as his fingers touched the stone, he felt a surge of power and energy unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The artifact was alive, and it seemed to resonate with the runes on the walls. The creature lunged at him, but the barrier held. Kyle turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't look back. He had the artifact, and now he needed to survive long enough to deliver it to the Empress. The path to the exit was unclear, but Kyle didn't stop. He wasn't just running from the creature anymore. He was running toward his destiny, toward the moment when he would finally understand what the artifact truly meant. As he ran, one thought consumed him. He couldn't fail now, not when he was so close. Kyle ran through the winding halls of the ancient ruins, his legs burning with every step. The artifact was heavy in his hand, its energy pulsing through his fingers, urging him forward. Behind him, the guardian creature continued to rage, its roars echoing off the walls, but the barrier Kyle had activated earlier still held. He could feel the pressure building. The creature was pushing against it, and it wouldn't be long before it broke through. He had to move faster. The maze of corridors seemed endless. Every turn looked the same: dark stone walls and glowing runes that flickered with an eerie light. Kyle's mind raced. He didn't know how long he had before the creature would get past the barrier. He didn't know how long he had to survive on this desolate planet. All he knew was that he had to reach the surface to get back to the ship, and to get the artifact to the Empress. His thoughts briefly drifted to her. He hadn't had time to think much about the Empress in the chaos of the ruins, but now that he had a moment, he couldn't help but wonder why she had chosen him for this mission. She had looked at him with those piercing eyes that had seemed cold and distant at first. But now he could see something else behind them. Curiosity. She had wanted to know who he was. And somewhere deep inside he realized that he, too, had wanted to know her. But there was no time to dwell on that. Now. The ruins were alive with the sound of crumbling stone, and Kyle had a long way to go before he reached the exit. The artifact hummed with power in his hand, and as much as he tried to ignore it, he couldn't deny that he felt its pull. There was something more to it, something that felt connected to the Empress's mysterious allure. Suddenly, the corridor before him opened up into a vast chamber. The ceiling was high, and the walls were covered in carvings that told the story of an ancient civilization. In the center of the room stood an ornate door, the edges glowing with a faint blue light. Kyle's heart skipped a beat. This was the way out. He could feel it. But just as he reached the door, a low rumble shook the ground beneath him.
Ah!
The Guardian was closing in. Kyle glanced over his shoulder, and his blood ran cold. The creature had broken through the barrier. Its massive form loomed in the entrance of the chamber, its eyes locked on him with pure, unrelenting fury. He was running out of time. With no more hesitation, Kyle grabbed the handle of the door and pulled. To his surprise, it opened easily, revealing a narrow tunnel beyond. He dashed inside without a second thought, and as he did, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening clang. The Guardian's roar echoed from the other side, but the door held. For now, Kyle took a deep breath, his chest heaving from the exertion. The tunnel ahead was dark, but he pressed on, knowing that there was no turning back. The path was steep and winding, and he could hear the sound of his own breathing as it echoed off the stone walls. The air was thick with dust, and the deeper he went, the harder it became to see. The artifact pulsed with a soft light, casting shadows across the tunnel as it guided his way. It felt like hours had passed before Kyle finally saw the faint light of the surface up ahead. He quickened his pace, his heart racing as he neared the exit. As he emerged from the tunnel and into the open air, he felt a rush of relief. He had made it. The ship was waiting for him, parked just a short distance away, its sleek silver form gleaming in the harsh light of the planet's twin suns. But his relief was short-lived. The sound of footsteps behind him made his heart skip a beat. He turned just in time to see the Guardian creature charging toward him, its enormous form moving faster than he thought possible. Kyle didn't hesitate, sprinted toward the ship, his legs burning with every step. The creature was right on his heels, its roar deafening as it reached out with massive claws. Kyle barely ducked in time as a claw swiped at him, narrowly missing his side. Pushed forward, his pulse hammering. In his ears, the ship was so close he could see it now. Just ahead of him, he reached the ship's entrance and quickly activated the ramp. It lowered with a soft hiss, and Kyle rushed inside, the door slamming shut behind him. He didn't stop to catch his breath. His hands flew across the control panel, and the ship's engines roared to life. The creature's roar echoed from outside, but Kyle didn't look back. He didn't have time. The ship lifted off from the surface, the planet shrinking away beneath him. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before him, and for a moment, Kyle allowed himself to relax. He had made it. He had survived. But as the ship sailed through the stars, his thoughts returned to the Empress. The artifact pulsed in his hand, its energy still strong, still calling to him. He had retrieved it, but now what? What would she do with it? What did it mean for them? Kyle leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. The journey had been far from easy. He had faced dangers beyond anything he had imagined, but he had succeeded. Now, he was headed back to the one place he never expected to care about, the palace of the Empress. When he arrived, he would return the artifact, but he knew that things had changed. He was no longer just the outsider, the mechanic who didn't care about titles or power. Now, he had a place here, a place beside the Empress. He wasn't sure what that meant yet. But he knew one thing for sure: His life had taken a turn that he could never have predicted. As the stars sped by outside, Kyle finally allowed himself to relax. The danger had passed, but a new challenge awaited him. What would happen when he returned to the Empress? Would she see him differently now? Would he see her differently? The answers were waiting, but for now, Kyle knew one thing: his story with the Empress was only just beginning. And whatever came next, he would face it not as a mechanic from Earth, but as someone who had earned a place in the galaxy's most powerful empire.